A Science of Change, podcasting by Gilmore Crosby, social scientist, author, and organization development professional since 1984. Welcome to yet another podcast. Today I'm going to talk about emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is an important part of leading, of following, of doing organization development work. If you are not aware of your own emotions and tuned into the emotions of others, you'll miss some of the primary indicators of whether change is being managed well. Kurt Lewin pointed out that when people are pushed, when solutions are pushed, tension goes up in a system, and the increase in tension eventually erodes the gains being made, and the system returns to its prior state, or at least does not effectively move forward, and so stays stuck. And so Lewin had a systemic way of talking about emotion, as do the family therapy sources that I have learned to draw from, like Murray Bowen and Edwin Friedman in particular. And so I wrote a book, Spirituality and Emotional Intelligence, where I weave in sources of wisdom throughout time and from around the globe, from many cultures, into understanding emotional intelligence. And that's what I'm going to read from in today's podcast. Excerpts from my book, Spirituality and Emotional Intelligence, and in particular, the section on what is emotional intelligence. So here we go. As in some of my other recordings, I'm going to read from the book, but also comment and diverge. And so, chapter 1 is called Crosby Style EQ. There's nothing so practical as a good theory, wrote Kurt Lewin. The proper meaning of theory is not idle speculation, but vision. And it was rightly said that, where there is no vision, the people perish. That's a quote from Alan Watts. We begin by building a mutual understanding of emotional intelligence, or EQ, from IQ, or the intelligence quotient. Much has been written on the subject. My own career as an MSW turned organization development professional has involved helping people acknowledge and shift the emotionality in relationships, groups, and organizations. To do so requires ongoing study of my own emotionality, as well as the integration of many sources into practical theory that can easily be conveyed. What you will get here is my own unique version of EQ. What is emotional intelligence? At its most basic, it is using your cognitive mind to be aware of your emotions and the emotions of others. Cognitive theory related to EQ, such as the interpersonal gap, helps us to understand the process that creates emotions in ourselves and in others. And I've covered the interpersonal gap in one of my earlier podcasts. It's also in this book, Spirituality and Emotional Intelligence. Theoretical models also help establish behavioral skills for expressing and responding to emotions in a manner more likely to create the outcomes we are hoping for. This text, while weaving in the promised spiritual sources, will address cognition and behavior, theory, and skill. I'm going to try to explain this model of EQ in a comprehensive way, yet hopefully without getting bogged down too much in the details. The spiritual connection to the social science is my real passion here, and I suspect the same will be true for most of my readers. On the other hand, I can't help the reader make that connection without understanding EQ, and the version of EQ conveyed here is well worth understanding. In my second book, Leadership Can Be Learned, I first called it Emotional Intelligence Crosby Style. I'm a little self-conscious about that title, yet I believe in the substance and the genuine uniqueness of this version of EQ. I could not go backwards to a more standard approach. In other words, I have some swag about this, and the image of Gangnam Style fits. If you aren't familiar with Gangnam Style, see YouTube. So, my swag shows up by me doing the Gangnam Style dance right now while I'm reading to you about this particular version of emotional intelligence. I also put a footnote in here, and this is true. If you can think of something better to call this version of EQ, let me know. Every descriptor I attached to it, like systems EQ, seemed corny. While you are busy visualizing my Gangnam Style dance, it's a good time to note that playfulness is important to EQ. One can be playful and serious at the same time. To paraphrase Edwin Friedman, the loss of the capacity to be playful means that your, quote, deadly serious, end quote, reptilian brain is running the show. I would rather have my mammalian brain engage. Warning. There is a barrel full of monkeys in my head. We will more fully explore this and many other implications of EQ and brain structure in the pages to come. While I have made significant contributions to the synthesis and the ongoing development of this approach, the Crosby and Crosby style EQ really is a homage to my father, United Methodist minister Robert P. Crosby, who is also, of course, a well-known, very influential OD guru and practitioner. Still with us yet today at age 95, and I give thanks. Over the course of his career, Dad synthesized and applied various sources regarding the role of emotions in interpersonal and organizational dynamics, and gave birth to the unique approach that I've been privileged to build upon. The word applied is important here. Father's applied behavioral science method, based on the work of Kurt Lewin, is to test our theories by applying them to ourselves and through our work with organizations. That was a form of Lewin's action research. The model and methods then stay practical because we evaluate the results in the field and only keep what survives actual usage. I encourage you to do the same as you read this book. My father was first exposed to the action research approach to emotion in 1953. While studying for his master's in theology at Boston University, Dad participated in his first T group, the group learning process invented by Lewin. The T stands for training. Father's adaptation of the T group, first to church camp settings and then to industry in a graduate program, that's the Leadership Institute of Seattle, which my brother has revigorated this very year, and I'm proud to be a faculty member of. Started in 1973 as a graduate program. Dad had brought it into being as a program even earlier than that. So Leo's, and so Dad has since raised the emotional intelligence of his work throughout all those places, church camps, etc., businesses, manufacturing plants in particular, has since raised the emotional intelligence of literally thousands of people in the United States and abroad, from many cultures and all walks of life. His T group work in industry included more blue-collar than white-collar workers, although plenty of both and almost always mixed together. This extensive T group work, which I have participated in for decades, has played an important role in the ongoing development of our approach. Along the way, Father met John Wallen. Wallen's aforementioned interpersonal gap, in my opinion, is unmatched in terms of teaching behavioral skills about emotions and clarifying the process of how we generate emotions within ourselves. Add family systems theory, Virginia Satir, Bowen, Friedman, and neuroscience, and Fowler's multidisciplinary approach evolved into a truly unique framework for EQ. In 1955, Daniel Goleman added his voice, popularizing EQ with the publication of his bestseller, Emotional Intelligence. Goleman built on reams of existing research, both to provide a model of EQ and to assert that the critical factor in career success is not IQ, but rather EQ. It's more important that you know how to connect and relate than it is that you're smart. Of course, the ideal is a combination of the two. But if you're super smart, but nobody can stand you, then you're probably not going to be as effective at applying your information, your wisdom, your intelligence to organizational issues. So actually, I've had a lot of fun working with a lot of engineers, nuclear engineers and other engineers, as they figure out how to connect with people better and think together versus just trying to do all the thinking in isolation and push their ideas on people. Anyway, building on all of the above, I've come to the following. While high IQ can be a blessing, it can also be a curse if applied with an inability to connect with others or to be detached from mental activity. For ages, people have put cognitive intelligence on a pedestal and unwittingly settled for and even fostered lower EQ by trying to control their emotions through denying or ignoring them. Ironically, such an attempt is based on fear of emotion. It's an emotional attempt. And hence, it is an irrational approach to emotion. Worse, it blinds the individual to important data available from their own inner guidance system. More on this later. To the extent one is blind to emotion, one is more likely to act out on emotion without understanding the root cause of their actions. To be rational about one's emotions, one must use their cognitive brain to pay attention to the messages that emotions are providing. Got that? That's really important. If you want to be rational, don't fight your emotions and don't disregard the emotions of others. That's irrational. That's fear-based. You're afraid of the emotions in yourself and others. If you want to be rational, you must use your cognitive brain to pay attention to the messages that emotions are providing. Emotions are information about your relationship to what's happening around you, what's happening in relationships, what's happening in the environment. They're information in others about the same thing, about how they, whether or not they understand your message, for instance. So emotional reactions are really important to pay attention to. Fortunately, science and spiritual practice both indicate that by working on awareness of emotion in yourself and in others, you don't have to be an Einstein. You don't have to be an Einstein to increase your emotional maturity, which research indicates is a major determinant of success and happiness. Speaking of Einstein, he was a model not just of intellect, but of playfulness, the important EQ ingredient mentioned above. Complementing his magnificent neocortex, Einstein probably had 2 barrels of monkeys in his head. There's a famous picture of him sticking his tongue out. He was playful from the beginning until the end, without which I doubt his IQ would have been unleashed with such creative force. Regarding EQ in general, Daniel Goleman tells us, in working with emotional intelligence, EQ accounted for 67% of the abilities deemed necessary for superior performance. EQ mattered twice as much as technical expertise or IQ. Now, I read somewhere that there was some challenge to what those statistics, how he came up with those statistics. But I still have faith that there's truth to them. Unlike IQ, which is understood to be essentially a fixed capacity, we either use it or we don't, and it can't be increased in any significant way. Whatever your current EQ, with intention and guidance, you can enrich this aspect of living, and in so doing, enrich your soul. That is the end of chapter 1. I'm now going to do the same thing with chapter 2, which is short but important. So here it is, the Crosby EQ hierarchy. Now you have to imagine, like Maslow's hierarchy, a pyramid. And in the pyramid, there's 3 basic layers. And the bottom foundational layer is self-awareness, or tuning into the self. And in that foundational layer, I have 6 bullets in the graphic in this book. Reclaiming your full range of emotion. Okay, so you were born with a full range of emotion. When you were born, just like any other healthy baby, you cried when you were upset, you smiled when you were happy. There was no shame in feeling an emotion. You didn't have the social awareness to think that some emotions are good and some emotions are bad, as you were later likely taught in whatever family system or culture you were in. You simply felt what you felt and revealed it. And so you had complete access to your full range of emotions. You were also very tuned in to the emotions of the people that were raising you. You didn't need to understand language yet to pick up on emotion. So we were really smart about emotion until we started getting socialized into ignoring emotion, pretending we were happy when we weren't happy. All that social conditioning that happens leads to adults who often have very little awareness of what they're feeling, even though they're still feeling. So that's the first bullet. Identifying your habits and patterns, closely related. For instance, I might be so afraid of anger that my habit is to not notice it when I start to feel even small amounts of something related to anger, like impatience or irritation. And so I may be so afraid of it that it'll get big that I pretend like it's not happening at all. I even convince myself. And so the habit and pattern could then be that I ignore it until, boom, it becomes this huge, intense experience that's further reinforces my fear of what happens if I feel anger. So I can end up very much in denial of any emotion in a similar way. So that's one type of habit and pattern. You could have patterns of not liking having differences with people. You're anxious about the relationship, and so you choose to avoid certain topics. That could happen at work or at home. You could have habits of blaming others when there is tension, instead of starting with self. So there's all kinds of habits and patterns that are useful. I mean, the only way that you can not be stuck in them is to be aware of them. So that brings us back to the introduction of this book and Thomas Merton's. Here it is. Thomas Merton's quote. He's a Christian mystic, a monk. Finally, I'm coming to the conclusion that my highest ambition is to be what I already am, that I will never fulfill my obligation to surpass myself unless I first accept myself. And if I accept myself fully in the right way, I will already have surpassed myself. For it is the unaccepted self that stands in my way, and will continue to do so as long as it is not accepted. When it is accepted, it is my own stepping stone to what is above me. So that applies to emotion, and not just emotion, but that applies to emotion. Do I accept what I feel? And do I accept what others feel? Using your inner guidance system, self-differentiation. Okay, that's the third bullet. And that involves three things. I'm not going to go into detail on them, but they're very important. One is to be able to separate yourself from others, self and others. That's step one in the inner guidance system. If others get upset, do I get upset? If others don't seem to want to talk about something, do I avoid the thing also? If others are happy and I'm worried, am I able to hold on to my worry? How much am I really being myself? How much am I simply fitting into the groups, whether family or other groups that I belong to? Self and other. If others get angry with me, do I blame them instead of being able to accept that, okay, they're angry, and try to understand them, and then notice my own emotional reactions? So, or am I fused? Is it hard for me to distinguish between what's really me, what's really you? That's the first part of the inner guidance system. The second part is feeling and thinking. When I feel defensive, do I simply start thinking defensive thoughts like that, and do I simply start behaving defensively without realizing that I'm feeling it? So anytime you think you need to explain yourself to somebody else because you think they misunderstood you, that's what I would call feeling defensive and behaving defensively. So if I'm doing that and I don't even realize I'm feeling it, then I'll probably do it more. And others will likely be reactive to it. And I'll likely be unaware of that or blame them for their reactions. So, can I notice what I'm feeling and then think independently of the feeling? Like think, oh, okay, I feel defensive. Now, what do I want to do? Well, maybe I misunderstood the other person and really I don't need... maybe they aren't attacking me or whatever it is I think, or criticizing me. And so, well, I think I'll check to find out whether I understood them correctly. And then you could do a behavioral skill like paraphrasing, where you find out, where you say something like, do you mean that you're not confident that I'm going to be able to fly this airplane? Whatever it is that the concern is around. That's would be more of separating what you're feeling from what you're thinking, and then being able to make choices about what to do next, which likely also, the more you separate thinking and feeling, the more your thinking is always influencing your thoughts. So, your feelings. So if you immediately are thinking, oh, they disrespect me, then you're probably going to feel more locked into feeling defensive, angry, irritated, whatever it is, ashamed, afraid that they're going to continue to disrespect you. If you can't separate, okay, I'm feeling this. Now, what do I think is really happening here? What are options I have besides just acting on the feeling? Then you're likely to perpetuate a fusion of thinking and feeling and be reactive. So that's why that part of the inner guidance system is important. The third part is to separate the past from the present. So in the past, we were all little independent, and we came up with all kinds of habits for dealing with that. And in the present, if we're with an authority figure, they're going to remind us some of the people that raised us. And we're going to have judgments about them based on that, about how they should treat us and so on. And or it could even just be the recent past. You felt disturbed by what someone said 2 minutes ago. If the past is flooding the present, then you will probably have a hard time hearing them in this next moment. You may miss the very thing that would help clear up the situation because you're wrapped up in your anger or whatever it is, whatever intense feelings you have about what happened 2 minutes ago or 10 years ago with that person. So separating the past from the present. What's really happening now? How do I want to be now with this person? Versus how much am I letting past emotionality and reactivity run my world in the present? So that's the inner guidance system. Piece of cake. Murray Bowen. This book, of course, gets into it in much more detail. But on to the next bullet here, understanding your mind-body connection. I hope you explore that if you haven't already in your life, because for instance, if your body's tense, that probably means you're tense emotionally. And the way you move, the way you care for your body, whether or not you really are healthy, what you eat, what you breathe, how much you work out, all these things are related to your emotional health. Reopening your mind. When you were born, you had a completely open mind. You absorbed language, you absorbed motor skills by watching people. You experimented without self-consciousness. You picked up an amazing amount of skill in a very short amount of time. And so as adults, it's likely that to some extent, we believe we already know everything we need to know. And it's not worth the risk of trying to learn something else. I might look bad if I go right now and try to learn how to play golf. Or if I try to learn another foreign language, then I may look bad. And finally, playfulness. That's the sixth bullet under self-awareness, which is the bottom third of the EQ hierarchy in this model, this pyramid. And so, am I genuinely playful in my work and home relationships? If not, then I'm probably tense. And if I'm tense, that means I'm probably letting the primitive brain, the reptilian, reactive brain, the fight, flight, freeze brain run a lot of my emotional life and my relationship life. So a little bit of nonsense now and then is relished by the wisest men and women, according to Willy Wonka. So playfulness is a clue. If you're having fun, that's a good sign. The middle of the pyramid then is empathy, which is, so the beginning starts with knowing yourself, tuning into yourself, self-awareness. This is empathy, tuning into others. And if you don't have any emotional self-awareness, then the odds of really understanding others are low. So to have, now you can also learn about yourself by tuning into others. So absolutely, you can learn more about your own emotionality if you're tuning into others. But the likely path towards really knowing others is to start with yourself. How would you feel in their position? For instance, is a great way to access empathy. It doesn't mean that they're feeling the same way, but it's a likely guide to at least get you started. So I have 5 things here into empathy, tuning into others. Compassion. One is genuinely caring. If you really don't care, then you're not likely to be very good at tuning into others. Accuracy, getting what they mean. And that takes behavioral skill. That takes really doing your best in a conversation to make sure to explore their own meaning, to explore the other's meaning. You go into every conversation knowing what you already know. If you actually want to learn anything, it's going to come from learning from the other, and maybe from a mix of the two. So accuracy, getting what they mean. Open mind, that's respecting differences. Not just being stuck on, so attached to your own ideas that you are desperate to be right, and you are always in debate mode. Interaction, conveying compassion, accuracy, and an open mind. So it takes the first three things, and in interaction, to be successful at conveying empathy, you have to let people have to get it. They have to get it that you care, you have compassion. They have to get it that you actually understand what they mean and how they're feeling, and they have to get it that you do have an open mind, that you're not just stuck in your own position and perspective. So that's the middle of the hierarchy, and at the top, really, these things are equal in many ways. But the last layer then is skills. And so I have 5 listed here, and I would add another, thanks to my brothers pointing it out, which is behavior description. That's a skill from the Interpersonal Gap by John Wallen, where you are able to say, what was the behavior that led you to an emotional reaction you have? And so you're not just saying behavior, you're not just saying judgments about behavior, like you were unsupportive, or whatever judgment you have is not behavior. The behavior was that you thought they were going to show up at 11 and they didn't show up until noon. That's behavior. Okay, and many people, when they're upset in particular, don't know the difference. They think their judgments, you don't care, are the same thing as an accurate description of the other person's behavior, and they aren't. There's a big important difference between what a person actually does and says and the reaction, the interpretations of their behavior that you hold. Those are two different things. And so go to the Interpersonal Gap podcast if you're not crystal clear, 100% clear, 180% clear about that concept, because that leads to a lot of needless, uncomfortable emotionality and miscommunication. So, behavior description, feeling description, that's naming what you feel. At times, it's really helpful for other people for you to put it into words. And people want to hear that from their boss. Are they happy with your performance, or are they unhappy? People want to know the truth about that, so that they can hopefully enjoy that their boss is happy. But if not, they can figure out what to do about it. So, feeling description, that's naming your feelings. Self-calming skills. I just breathe in deep through my nose, into my belly, doing it even slower than I just did it, repeating it 2 or 3 times, meditating and just doing deep breathing to calm the mind. For me, I think about my father in difficult situations. I think about Kurt Lewin. I have heroes, Roberto Clemente, that are calming influences on me. Luke Skywalker. So, whoever is calming, however you do it, figure out ways to calm yourself when you feel emotionally intense. Active listening, I've already talked about that some. You don't listen just by keeping your mouth shut. To be an effective listener, you have to check whether or not you understand what people mean. So there's a dialogue that takes place to be an effective listener. And that's also part of that interpersonal gap model. Conflict skills. Well, some of what I just mentioned is related to that, but there's also just knowing what your habits are with conflict. Do you insist on talking now? Do you insist on not talking now? What are your habits and beliefs about conflict, and how can you be better at acknowledging and working differences and also respecting other people's way of doing that? And systems thinking. And so systems thinking, it starts with the basics of every relationship being a system. If you're tense, they'll probably feel tense. So instead of blaming them, how do you calm yourself? Then in the family system, are people talking directly to each other when they're upset with each other? Or do they talk about each other behind each other's backs? And are you involved in that? And that carries over into work systems. So are people being direct at work and talking to each other? Or do they just blame each other, blame other groups, blame other locations, and just hang out with the people that agree with them, that everyone else is to blame? Then you have a broken system. And so there's other ways to think systemically. Like you could have goal misalignment that's leading to emotional unrest. For instance, if the parts department is measured by keeping costs down and the rest of the organization is measured by producing, then there's a good chance everyone will be mad at the parts department if they are keeping costs down by not providing enough parts for the system to keep running. So, and then people will be angry and blaming, and there'll be tension. And so it's an emotional issue. So there can be a lot of different ways that there can be misalignment in a system that leads to emotional unrest. So there you go. That's the Crosby EQ hierarchy in a nutshell. And here's the 3 pages that follow that. The Crosby EQ hierarchy gives you a quick visual of the elements of Crosby style EQ. The foundation is self-awareness. As Gandhi put it, be the change that you wish to see in the world. If you don't understand yourself, the odds are low that you will truly understand others. That's empathy. Or develop skills. Start with yourself. And here, as I do throughout this book, I quote from a spiritual source, in this case, the book of Luke, the Gospel of Luke. And so this is a quote of Jesus. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, quote, brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, end quote, when you yourself fail to see the plank in your own eye? You hypocrite! First take the plank out of your eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Start with yourself. When your emotional intensity increases, if you are imbalanced by focusing more on others than on self, there are consequences. Reflect on yourself. When the heat is on, do you focus more on self or on other? Focusing primarily on the perceived faults of others and or blaming them in moments of conflict is a common habit. Focusing on self, not just on my opinions, but rather on what I have done to increase tension and what can I do to decrease it, empowers me and de-escalates tension in myself and likely in the other. First, you have to notice in a reflective way when your emotional intensity is going up and not just wallow in the adrenaline rush. With that awareness, emotionally intelligent action is possible. I don't know about you, but when I do get angry, when I allow myself to get angry, I like the energy. Roberto Clemente said that playing angry, the reason he played so well was because he was angry. Now, I think there's other ways to play well and have energy in sports, but that was true for Roberto, and it worked pretty well for him. It doesn't work so well for me in relationships. If I start to just let myself get into the rush, the adrenaline rush. Okay, so Don't wallow in the adrenaline rush. Without awareness, emotionally intelligent action is possible. A reliable first practical action is some sort of self-calming, as mentioned. That can be done in many ways. Mindful breathing and or by skillfully tuning into the other are two such skills. If, on the other hand, my habit is to start by critiquing and trying to change others, I will predictably create a counterforce. Homeostasis in the relationship will be maintained, even if it is undesired. I will be able to explain my position, but I will have trapped my own cognition in the service of attacking and defending, which is a very narrow and self-limiting focus. Confirmation bias, only seeing what I expect to see, is inevitable in human cognition, but it can be reduced through awareness and an intention of open-mindedness. Confirmation bias increases when we allow ourselves to get stuck in a loop of explaining, in our heads and possibly to others, that they are wrong and we are right. Such defending is how most people handle critical feedback. As evidenced in the Bible, blame goes way back in human history. It didn't help then, and it doesn't help now. So this is from Genesis. The man said, quote, "The woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree and I ate it," end quote. It was her fault. The woman said, quote, "The serpent deceived me and I ate," end quote. It was the serpent's fault. Edwin Friedman playfully suggests that blame was the actual original sin. This is a Friedman quote. If there was an original sin that has been transmitted down through the generations, it was not an act of disobedience, which, after all, could also be seen as an act of differentiation, but their response after they had disobeyed. Friedman, 2008. If I stick with blaming the other, now this is on, I'm moved on from Friedman's quote. If I stick with blaming the other, if I believe the problem is completely or even primarily outside of me, then the power to change lies outside as well. And back to the New Testament. Now, throughout this book, I must say, here's a Buddhist quote coming up. I drew from many sources. Here I've drawn mostly from Christianity, which is my own chosen faith. But I have great respect for all paths that lead to godliness and to especially peace and love amongst the human race. Spiritual sources that point in that direction speak to me. So, if I stick with blaming the other, if I believe the problem is primarily, completely or even primarily outside of me, then the power to change lies outside of me as well. In other words, I'm helpless. And here is Jesus from the book of Mark. Listen to me, everyone, and understand this. Nothing outside a person can defile them by going into them. Rather, it is what comes out of a person that defiles them. Sometimes, of course, the problem is primarily outside the self. A Jewish person in Nazi Germany, as Kurt Lewin was, would have been best off fleeing if they could. A woman who is beaten by her spouse would be wise to also flee. EQ in such extreme circumstances is to respect one's own fear and get to physical safety if possible. On the other hand, Gandhi's words were spoken in the context of confronting the British Empire. He still chose to start with himself, even though much of the problem clearly lay outside of himself. He still chose to be the change he wanted to see, and in so doing create a mass movement in the face of life-threatening force. He calmed himself, overcame his fears, and helped a nation do the same. To change a system, one still has to start with the self. That doesn't mean that the victim is to blame for the existence of the system. George Floyd was not to blame for the existence of institutional racism in the United States. It does mean that change must start somewhere. Start with yourself. New Testament again. John, this time. Let any of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her. And now, Thich Nhat Hanh, Buddhist source. Blaming never helps. When you plant lettuce, if it does not grow well, you don't blame the lettuce. You look into the reasons it is not doing well. It may need fertilizer, or more water, or less sun. You never blame the lettuce. Yet, if we have problems with our friends or our family, we blame the other person. And if we know how to take care of them, they will grow well like lettuce. Blaming has no positive effect at all, nor does trying to persuade using reason and arguments. That is my experience. No blame, no reasoning, no argument, just understanding. If you understand and you show that you understand, you can love. And the situation will change. Whatever situation you are in, you have more. Now, this is me moving on. Whatever situation you are in, you have more influence over yourself than over anyone else. How much influence you have on yourself can be increased through the application of scientific method. You can do action research on yourself. You are actually already doing so by reading this. Identifying your habits and patterns is a critical EQ skill. It positions you to experiment by not giving into your habits and by replacing habitual behaviors with new ones. We will suggest many behavioral options and skills in this book. Trying to identify your own habits and patterns might be one of those new skills unless you already consciously do so. Crosby-style EQ is science, but it is not rocket science. I will keep it as simple as possible. So, in emotionally tense situations, what is your habit? Do you tend to start with a focus on self or with a focus on others? In non-life-threatening relationships, when the emotional crap hits the fan, most people I have met focus on the changes they believe others need to make. I have the same bad habit. Even after doing years of work, I have to catch that habit and work on myself. A dysfunctional person that can go on for a lifetime is if both parties are focused on what is wrong with the other. Separating won't solve that. You will bring the same pattern to the next relationship, regardless of whether it is at work or at home. That's a really important thing to chew on if you haven't prior to this. If you're stuck in a pattern where you're always focused on what's wrong with other people, just getting away from those people isn't going to change things because you'll bring the same pattern to the next relationship, whether at work or at home. It's not the only option. Don't wait for the other to change. Work on yourself. Don't use what they do as an excuse for not experimenting with what you do. A family systems therapist, Tim Weber, who is also faculty at the Leadership Institute of Seattle that I already mentioned, put it this way: the work of the self is not dependent on the response of the other. End quote. They don't have to be the ones that are different for you to be different. This book, will give you ample ideas for how to experiment. It's true. It's a great book. And so that's what happens next in this book. It goes into chapter 3 is about level 1. Chapter 4 is about level 2 in that pyramid. Chapter 5 is about level 3, and so on. And then there's the interpersonal gap in here. And a lot of, I think, really wonderful stuff that I picked up about emotion, understanding different types of emotion. Anger. Anger is a righteous emotion. It is almost necessary to your being, according to Martin Luther King Jr. So again, I draw in quotes. Here's the one from Clemente. If I would be happy, I would be a very bad ball player. With me, when I get mad, it puts energy in my body. So many people think that anger is just bad. And so then they don't manage their own irritation, their own small anger well, and it can become big anger before they realize it. And that, again, can be a pattern that reinforces their belief that it's bad because it's ugly when it's big. So these are the kinds of things that are also in this book. I will likely explore them in future podcasts. I'll just leave you with one last thing here. The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are. That's Joseph Campbell. And it's been a privilege talking to you in this podcast. Take care. Hey, I appreciate you listening. This, again, is Gil Crosby. And I want you to take advantage of what's available to you. I have many free materials. I am happy to talk to people about their situations, especially if you're trying to create change, either social change or organization change. We have frequent workshops that are available, T group workshops. If you have never been in a T group with us, then don't miss it in your life. Many people have said to me, of all the trainings I've ever received, I got this one 30 years ago, and it's the only one that stuck with me. You're learning from your actual interactions with the other participants and with the faculty. The faculty are walking the same talk that they're teaching of behavioral skills. It's a training workshop. That's what the T stands for. This is done in the spirit of the creation of T groups by Kurt Lewin and his associates. It's for groups. It's for teams. That's how it was originally designed. It is a opportunity to learn about theory and put it directly into practice. Again, the original design, you learn things and then you put them into practice. It was not just all ambiguity, which is how some T groups, most are led today, where the faculty hardly says anything. That's not how this is designed. So join us for that. There's always workshops. There's the Leadership Institute of Seattle, which has certificate programs, a two-year program where you will learn from T groups and learn how to do all the organization development work that my father designed, most of it, and I continue that practice alongside my brother Chris and many other associates. So don't be a stranger. There's a lot going on. It's always changing. So be in touch, and it's on the website, crosbyod.com. I look forward to working with you in your organization or as you pursue things like reducing gun violence and decreasing racism in our society. Whatever your goals are, the social science of Kurt Lewin guides how to achieve those goals in a reliable way. And so that's what I apply and practice every day and invite you to.